For my final video on Conan's new companions, I wanted to cover probably one of the biggest points of contention with this mechanic, the time gates. Are they good, bad, or somewhere in between, and what should be done to balance them out? Today we're going to discuss exactly that, and the video will be spoiler free for both companions. So let's get started. If you're not really familiar with them, time gates are a mechanic in the new companion quests coming in the Age of Heroes Chapter 1, where the quest giver needs to rest. At the time of recording, time gates are 8 hours long and they are real time, meaning if you hit the time gate at dead on midday, you'll be able to continue at 8 PM regardless of if you're online or offline. It purely counts real world time. They are designed to sit at natural rest points in the quests and to extend the playtime of said quests. To quantify the amount of time gates, there are a fair few. There are currently 2 companions, Lu Fei and Freya. Freya's quest has 5 time gates and Lu Fei's has 3. That means that Freya's quest has a required 40 hours of downtime and Lu Fei's has 24, making each a pretty long quest but not really heavily involved over that entire playtime due to the time gates. In my view, the purpose of the time gates is to extend the playtime and to give the player a chance to do something else whilst waiting for the quest to progress, and also in certain points to aid the narrative. This approach is kind of a double-edged sword in a way. On one hand, you're not locked into these quests, so if you get halfway in and decide you need to go run some purges or do some building, you can just hit the next time gate and go off to do whatever you want, while still making passive progress towards the next step that you can then pick back up whenever you're ready. On the other hand though, if you really just want to get your hands on the rewards as fast as possible, you can't just sprint through the quest, you need to wait through the time gates. That latter part is where a lot of complaints about this system have come in, and to be fair, I can definitely understand them. Now of course, to play devil's advocate, as someone who sees a borderline unhealthy amount of discussion about Conan Exiles, one of the major points that often comes up is about having content to do that isn't easily done in an hour or so. For people who play Conan a lot, like me and probably a lot of you, we kind of make our own content through building, role-playing, playing with friends, custom servers and so on, but there can be a bit of a void in the end game when you've already tackled the dungeons and built your base, where there isn't content that can keep your focus for a long time that isn't self-directed. One way to get more life out of new content is to timegate it. This is a fairly common thing and you see it in different forms across different games. It extends the lifespan of the content but does also bring with it downsides. The first downside is the artificial extension can cause a good bit of frustration, and the second downside is the balance of time investment versus reward. Time gating content can be a good way of selling the effect of something like exhaustion, being wounded, or needing time to do some other activity relevant to the quest that the player is not involved in. Whilst it can be a very powerful narrative tool to make the player go do something else while the quest giver will recover or something along those lines, its impact is limited by the fact that that whole process of recovery or resting from exhaustion isn't displayed. As for the investment versus reward side of it, that's a bit of a tougher situation. Generally, reward values are determined by 3 metrics: time, difficulty, and prerequisites. In Conan, gathering plant fibre is probably the lowest echelon. It requires very little time, has basically no difficulty, and has very few prerequisites. On the opposite end of the spectrum, unlocking endgame armour from a dungeon should require a fair amount of time, a decently high level of difficulty, and a decent amount of prerequisites to ensure you can actually get through the experience for the hopefully suitable reward. In that regard, companion quests, at least in their current state, don't quite match up. The difficulty is not terribly high, the prerequisites are not awful, they're roughly around the mid-game, but the time investment is skewed very high because of the time gates, which can result in the rewards feeling fairly underwhelming. Though the time gates are not actually, active gameplay where you have to do things in regards to the quest, I think this is a pretty solid case of time gates perhaps actively hampering the overall experience of the quests and the enjoyment of the rewards too. Quite often the rewards do not match with the perceived amount of time put in to the quest. There is also the issue of suitability of the time gates and if they truly fit into the right spots. They arguably do fit into natural rest spots most of the time, but as I've mentioned before in my previous review, there are some, like Freya's final time gate, that I think could be entirely removed, and that removal would only benefit the story, so time gates need to be placed properly in the right spots so as not to frustrate the story. So we know what time gates are for, and the issues they pose. How can they be improved? Well, I don't think time gates are entirely bad. I'm of the opinion they can actually be used intelligently in the game, so I'm going to give my recommendations on that basis. I think time gates should serve the narrative and the pacing first, and everything should be done to mitigate frustration and have the time gates serve only to elevate the narrative, not frustrate or take away from it. Firstly, time gates should always have significant content between them. Waiting 8 hours just to grab some items and then be greeted immediately with another time gate is not a satisfying conclusion to that quest step, and it feels rather underwhelming. The segments between time gates should always have enough content to warrant the rest period in the narrative, and not disappoint the player by giving them 5 or 10 minutes of content after an 8-hour wait. Secondly, I've debated this one a few times, but I think time gates should just be cut in half at least. 8 hours is a long time, 4 hours sounds a bit more appropriate. It would take the mandatory wait time down for Freya and Lu Fei to 20 hours and 12 hours respectively, which I think is a much more palatable rest period. However, I'm also open to going as low as 2 or 1 hours as well. I think that would be fine. It's a bit of a finicky issue because if you keep the time gate too high then it kills replayability, but if you take it too low then it kind of feels like the quest has been rushed, so there's a sort of golden area there that needs to be found. Thirdly, time gates should only happen when justified by the narrative. This probably can't retroactively be applied to Lu Fei and Freya because all their voice acting and coding is there, but it could for future companions. Say we've got Barry the Berserker as a companion in the future. His quest should never hit a time gate unless it's warranted. If you two spend all day raiding an enemy camp, he needs to sleep. If he gets wounded, he needs to heal. He should only ever trigger a time gate when it helps the narrative, to sell the effect of something, or where it makes sense that something needs to happen without the player's presence. Fourth point, rewards should always match the time investment. So far, companion quests haven't been too difficult, and if there were no time gates, the rewards would probably be fair for a quest that might take an hour maybe, but with all the time gates there needs to be better rewards. Armour, weapons, decorations, build pieces, just stuff to sweeten the deal. Seeing as time is the dominant metric in companion quests, the rewards should feel fitting for the amount of time you spent working on it and waiting for it. Finally, the time gates just need to be communicated better. Most people involved in Conan Exile's discourse online could tell you that the time gate for the companions is 8 hours, but we are probably a minority. The player that does not watch YouTube or browse the forums has no way of really telling how long that time gate is. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 5 days, and they just have no clue. Obviously, I don't want future companions to say, come back at 8:06 PM Eastern Time, but this is where a quest log would be good to have, or something along those lines. A journal where the player character can track what they were doing in a quest, and note something along the lines of, Barry said to come back in 8 hours. Nothing immersion breaking, just something small to keep track and communicate to players how long they need to wait. To wrap things up, Conan's new companion system is fairly good, but ends up being frustrated to a decent degree by the time gating mechanic. It draws out the questing process to a point that isn't quite made up for by the rewards, and sometimes even damages the narrative. In my view, time gates should be changed to reduce frustration and aid the narrative as their primary force, rather than trying to artificially inflate the time to complete the quest. I think that could be done through 5 major points: adding significant content between time gates, greatly reducing the length of the time gates themselves, configuring them to primarily benefit the narrative, ensuring the quest rewards are worth the time investment, and communicating the true nature of time gates. Additionally, there is a set of admin commands that can be used to skip the real-time requirements. I'll post them down in the pinned comment. Remember, they can only be used in single player or on servers where you have admin permissions, so they probably won't be useful for most people, but it's good to have them anyway. Companions have good potential, and for the first iteration I think Funcom could have done a lot worse. I already presented my beta review of this system in the previous video, which I've linked in the card in the top right, but the time gates are really one of the biggest pain points for most people, so much so that I thought a dedicated video would be the best way to give feedback on it. Hopefully this is something the dev team can use to improve this aspect of the companions in the future. Thank you for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. Let me know what you think should be done with the Timegate mechanic in the comments below. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.